Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of One Vision, the Fintech Fuse. This is Theo, your host for the episode. Joining us today is Chris Juneau, SVP, Head of SAP Concur Product Marketing. And welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you, Theo, for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, let's start off with a brief recap from the most recent SAP Concur CFO Insights report. I love that report. It's packed with so much in there. So let's dissect that a little bit. What did you find interesting in that research? What jumped out at you?
Sure, absolutely. No, and it does have some great facts and figures. So first jumps out is 90% of senior finance leaders are prioritizing equipping their organization for what they call unforeseen challenges. And we believe that reflects the transformative impact that AI can have on the finance function. And then the data reveals itself even more. 61% of those CFOs view AI as essential to managing that unexpected. And then 51% are actually putting their investment dollars where their mouth is, so to speak, and are channeling investments into AI across a spectrum of financial processes. So so you had this high emphasis, this need, and now investment. And then on the flip side, there's a counter to that. 58% admit that they don't understand completely AI technology. And then 46% express an urgent need to learn more. And that data mirrors exactly what we've seen. We had our global user conference in Las Vegas a month or two ago. Then I was just in the UK and London for our MIA fusion, and our AI sessions were oversubscribed. So which fits the those data points which I just threw out at you.
For those who are listening in, you can't see my visual, but I was nodding because I was actually at the conference in Vegas and the rooms were packed. I thought to myself, that's the way to see the trends, to see which rooms are packed and where people
Absolutely.
are following, right?
So exactly.
It's funny you mentioned that. So now another topic I wanted to bring up is on the news all the time. It's about economic conditions. So while over half of the CFOs that were surveyed indicated that they're still worried about economic conditions, they're all investing for growth.
Right.
Which is great news for a lot of us. Now, what are some of the areas that they are investing in? And did you find that shift from 2023?
Well, first, which when you're referencing the economic conditions, inflationary pressures are impacting everyone. We actually see it in our data that we process across Concur Expense. And I'll give you some more stats. First, when you look at 2023, and we always benchmark against 2019, aka pre-pandemic, airfares are up 10%, on average $770. And for those who travel, both personally and professionally, you see, right? You see that. And then, as of course, the viewers can't see, but you put your hand on your heart when I said travel, and I'd love to travel as well. Then the second category, which has seen a huge increase, and we've certainly read about in the news on the consumer side, is gas or petrol, where that is up upwards of 37% compared to 2019 from an expense transaction perspective. And then third, again, both impacting personal and professional, but from a professional perspective, food and meals are up 30%. So though, these elements of the T&E transactions have increased, and we see organizations taking steps to rein in those costs. At the same time, they're still prioritizing the investment in terms of what AI brings them for a few reasons. First, I believe it gets back to the resiliency that we've talked about. Second, they're trying to future-proof their business. One thing that AI is very good at, and we've all heard this, is it's good at analyzing and processing vast amounts of data, seeing patterns in that data and being able to predict. And so as finance professionals are looking to sort of future-proof their organizations, they see that investment in AI as critical to doing that.
So since you mentioned the name, I was wondering when we're going to bring up the word AI, but since you mentioned it, let's double click on that. Of course, right? We could not have a conversation without artificial intelligence. Now, but that from a technology perspective is not new. It's been around since the 1950s. And in finance, we've been using it for bookkeeping, risk
Hmm.
management, fraud, compliance, etc., etc. However, with that being said, there's so much that's going on and so much excitement, and we cannot stop talking about it. From your perspective, what has changed though from where AI is being deployed, how is being used, what is different this time around?
That's a great question. Clearly, when we started 2023, generative AI was sort of a novelty. We'd watch the news programs where they're talking to the chatbot, that and so forth, and it began as a novelty. And at that time, in early 2023, only 5% of organizations said that they were using AI or generative AI applications on a broad basis. So that was only 5%. Then you fast forward, and when I travel, I love reading English newspapers, or if you're fortunate enough to be in Japan or Korea where they have the little TV screens on the back, right? And literally I could see the shift. I visited Japan 3 times in 2023, and by the end of 2023, every ad, with the exception of a hot water heater ad, was related to AI. And I think partly it's driven by the enthusiasm, the promise, the tech investment which is occurring across. But I think it's also organizations now see that it's necessary for ultimately to gain the operational efficiency and maintain their competitive advantage. Because I think it's partly fueled by the well, as you said, AI has been in existence and been employed, since the early 50s. Now we're seeing, proliferation of examples, both in our personal life and our professional life. And I believe all of that is drawing that attention in addition to the investment that companies such as my company, SAP, is making, and others with regard to bringing AI to the enterprise. And so Gartner actually predicts that 80% of enterprises will have generative AI embedded in their operations by 2026. So imagine from 2023, you go from 5%, now Gartner's saying 80% in 2 years. That is a huge transformation. And and nowhere is it more prominent than finance. And in this case, we can now say finance in many ways is leading the way because dealing with vast amounts of data, typically short on human resources and so forth, and trying to ensure the integrity of their financial processes. So AI lends itself perfectly to financial processes. And that's why ourselves, we've been investing, quote unquote, in AI for the last 10 plus years to infuse in our solutions to drive greater efficiencies on our side. And now we're putting it forth to drive greater efficiencies on our customer side.
I like how you painted the story, and I do agree with the excitement outside the U.S. as well.
Absolutely.
I own a hot water heater thing, and it is not yet AI enabled, not at least that I know of, but I see that changing. Um,
Sure.
I saw it even with the different appliances, right? Smart appliance, even the washing machine. It says
Right.
it's AI optimized.
Yeah, look at, we were all first, from a consumer perspective, we introduced, the Nest thermostat learns from you, right? And so we're seeing that in our personal life. Now, of course, I have to go clear it because now we're in the summer months. It's like, no, no, no. My air conditioner must come on since it's, 105 outside and so forth. But yeah, it's really it's transforming our personal life and people are recognizing it and with a bit of trust and also just realizing that it's mission critical for them to sustain their competitive advantage.
Absolutely. It's I think it will get to a point where we will stop talking about if we are using it and
Yes.
changing to how we're using it,
How?
right?
That's right.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, but with any technology, right? One of the things that people do talk a lot about is what if? What if it gets exploited? What if it gets misused? That's always a potential, anything. So, what are some of the things that, in terms of artificial intelligence, that we need to keep in mind as we continue to adapt it more and more in our work life?
Great question. First and foremost, artificial intelligence, the large language models and so forth are built on data and vast amounts of data. So, so understanding, which gets back to the education element we talked about earlier from our survey results. It's understanding What data sets is your AI potentially leveraging? And then, and then second, SAP, I applaud, has taken an approach. They call it relevant, reliable, and responsible AI for business. And so we have essentially a council that reviews all our AI scenarios, both from the data that we're using, as well as additional tests to ensure that it's relevant, reliable, and responsible. So I think for finance professionals, some of I we talked to in Las Vegas, and I talked to in London 2 weeks ago, just ask a lot of finance professionals ask questions. How's my data being used? How is the large language model trained? What was the data of that large language model? Is it primarily US? Was it primarily European data or global data? So I think just like with any transformative opportunity, it's seek to understand and validate and get comfortable with how the technology is operating. There should never be a blanket trust.
I feel like I can put that as the headline. There shouldn't be a blanket trust. We need to earn their trust, but
That's
by
right.
doing the steps that you were talking about, and you have me at responsible AI. That is something I applaud SAP for doing, and I hope that more companies will follow. So now, before we close, I do want to ask you, where do you see AI as having the most impact from a finance function perspective in, let's say, in the near future? I feel like we can't talk about like 10 years from now because that feels so far. So let's bring it back
Right.
in the near future. And what will be some of the more interesting use cases that get you excited and that we'll be talking about?
Well, sure. Well, most everyone who in business has done an expense report. And the pain and suffering of first completing an expense report, second, submitting and potentially approving an expense report, and third, if you're in finance and accounting, dealing with the myriad of expense reports, validating, auditing, and so forth. So, what is it? Vast amounts of data. So, why can't we apply AI, which we have been over the last 10 years, to do the things so humans don't have to? And we have a solution we call Concur Verify that during the creation of the expense report or the expense transaction, it's immediately applying both the T&E policy of that company to those transactions, but also validating the digital receipts that the employee attaches to that transactions to assure it's real, that it's valid, and it should be associated with that expense type. So imagine now, before in the early days, I'm not going to say how long ago, but in the early days, we would always ask, well, how many expense reports do you want to audit? And the customers would say, well, I don't have enough people to audit 100%. I'll just do a random audit, typically 20%. Well, now technology, it can do 100%. And that's, you know, and so, and then you get to a point, I like to say that this potential financial process that we help automate for organizations goes from being expense reporting to exception reporting. Because if you think about it, it's like 97, and we have data on this, 97% of those transactions that were interrogated or reviewed by Concur Verify or AI tool, only 3% required human intervention. So imagine if you're a finance professional, it's like, I can give you the control that you require to your comfort level and for the industry that you're in, but you only have to now review a subset of those financial transactions because the technology is doing it on your behalf. So, now you can focus on the exceptions, and then if there's time back, which we will hope to give you time back, you can go focus on what's most important to your organization. So that's the promise and the opportunity is rethinking these financial processes, which are manually intensive, allowing AI to work on the behalf, and then turn them into, instead of reporting processes, could be exception processes in the specific to travel booking and expense reporting.
Going from expense reporting to exception reporting. And
Yeah.
yes, I do look forward to the day when we don't have to do all of that.
Yes.
That will be the future. I think a lot of us would love to see.
Absolutely. Because doing an expense claim or auditing an expense claim, when do you do an expense claim or expense report? At the end of the day, you may be pouring yourself, glass of wine or whatever beverage of your choice, because you just have to do it. It's not because your business needs you to do it. You have to do it,
It's the grunt
right? So
work, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. But it's a necessary because it's a financial process. And of course, you want to get your money back, and the company wants to ensure that you spent the money wisely. But it's really, so how can you take that? I love to say it's like, I can't think of other processes where we want end users to spend the least amount of time using our technology. We talk about, other tech companies, grabbing eyeballs and time and so forth. And we're like, no, 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 we want just the opposite. We want Theo to spend the least amount of time doing an expense report so she can spend more time doing podcasts. That's what we do.
Or I can spend more time chatting with you. That would be
Yeah.
wonderful too. So this is great. That is indeed the future. I think part of the future we could look forward to. And I can't wait to chat with you next on something else. I think it's going to be really interesting too. But until then, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us on the show. And for the rest of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of One Vision. We will talk to you all next week.